Hey, it's Ronsley. I'm in one of my favorite places here in Brisbane, and I have this great episode with Spencer Lodge today. He has an amazing podcast called Unscripted with Spencer Lodge. I interviewed him when I was in Dubai. He's one of the top influencers there, and we speak about how he uses his podcast as a business and why it's so profitable for him and why he spends so much time, effort, money on doing his podcast. This is a really valuable podcast primarily because you can understand some of the tactics that is being used and where you can get the leverage if you have a podcast yourself. All right, let's learn.
You can't find your voice if you don't use it. This is We Are Podcast, formerly called Should I Start a Podcast? A podcast for podcasters who want a podcast that grows their business and brand. How many times can we say podcast in a sentence? Here's your host, Ronsley. He has interviewed more than 1,500 people, has been listened to over 5 million times in 133 countries. He has helped create over 1,100 podcasts for businesses, brands, and personalities. He's been doing this for more than a decade. Get ready to take notes. Enjoy the show.
Spencer Lodge, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for making the time because I know how busy you are. I appreciate the time, the energy. I want to talk about your entrepreneurial journey to start with. When you look back at your career as an entrepreneur, what stands out that is not on the bio?
I think a lot of people assume I'm something that I'm not. I don't see myself as an entrepreneur. I just see myself as someone who didn't do very well at school, learned how to sell when I was young. Being able to sell and being really good at sales meant that I was able to make money. I worked as an intrapreneur more than an entrepreneur because I was a commission-only salesperson really for the biggest part of my career. And it was only in 2012, 13 that I went into the building my own business space. I'd invested in money in other people's businesses, but that was the first time I'd done that. When I look at entrepreneurs, I see them making a lot of mistakes, spending a lot of time on stuff that doesn't really matter. And for me, no matter what your business is, no matter what you're selling, a service, a product or whatever, for me, the number one focus is get money through the door. Mm-hmm. And so that's always been the driver for me. I didn't care the color of the logo. I didn't care about how pretty the website was. I just cared about how do we get money through the door. And maybe the way that I did it was a way that would be different to others. Mm. But that was my priority more than anything else.
And also from knowing you over the last month, you identify as a salesman, you identify as a salesperson. What are some of the things that you see nowadays as an entrepreneurship, especially with social, that is distracting entrepreneurs from sales? Because I agree with you 100%. I had to learn it the hard way that sales was important. I had to lose a business, have $500,000 of debt because I'm the artist. I'm the artist that had this idea that selling my art was a selling of my soul. I don't know where I got that from and where that embedded inside me, but it was there. And I had to go to rock bottom or underneath rock bottom to figure out that for my art to be sustainable, I needed to make money. Do you see that? And do you see that often today?
I think a lot of people are trying to design and create perfection before they start selling whatever it is. And so to me, that's crazy. You've got to get going and get on the way. Stop worrying about everything being perfect all the time. And then also people don't think what their sales strategy is from the beginning. It's like, why are we not, if we build a business plan and we say we're going to do X million in revenue, okay, so what's the path to that? Oh, content. Well, that's not the path to it. Everyone that's out on social media that thinks that you make money just by creating content is naive beyond belief. You can create as much content as you want. It's how you use the content to convert it to sales that's really critical. How you have a plan around building awareness around a product and a service that draws people towards you, but you still then have to convert them into paying clients. And a lot of the time you hear people say, the clients will come to me if I create good enough content. If you just relied on that, you'd go bust. You've got to have outreach. You've got to be out there metaphorically knocking on doors, metaphorically banging the drum, metaphorically making the calls. You've got to be doing those types of things to be able to get those types of clients. And It's just a shame that so many businesses fail, and invariably they fail because they just don't get enough money through the door. They start stacking up costs, and those costs, some of them they didn't even need to stack up, but they do. And then before they know it, they've gone into a situation where they've remortgaged their house and they've put everything on the line, and they still haven't made it work. And so that's for me the saddest thing.
Do you find that rejection is probably the biggest thing that people are trying to avoid?
Of course. Everyone avoids rejection, and it's like some personal dig at them. But anybody doing anything is going to get more no's than yeses. When you do anything, invariably there's more no's than yeses. So why do we fear them? It's like this idea in our mind that everyone's going to say yes because what we've got is so amazing and so great. But we haven't got something amazing and great for everyone at all times. And we haven't factored into the fact that point that even if someone's got a need for the product, are they in the right headspace to buy the product? Is it the right time for them? So we have to stop and really understand that rejection isn't a problem for our business. It's part of becoming successful. And you don't learn from the people that say yes, you only learn from the people that say no. Why did they say no? What can I do differently next time to make sure they don't say no? That's where the learning is. Learn about rejection, just keep learning about it. Make yourself good at dealing with rejection and get over this drama and this ego that you've got, taking everything so personally. It's a business. Get on with it.
If they do get rejected, how would they deal with that? Are there any ways to look at it differently?
Yeah, there is. Let's take the online approach.
Yeah.
Okay, let's say we create ourselves a funnel. Let's say there's 100 at the top and we convert 5 at the bottom of the funnel.
Yeah.
So there's 95 people that have said no. They might not have said no to your face, but they've said no online. They've said no. The 5 people at the bottom have said yes. We don't sit focused on the 95 that said no. We're focused on the 5 that said yes. We need to really position this in our brain as literally a structure. Let's go and find no's. We're going to say we need these no's because we're learning from them. When you're looking for yeses, the no is the rejection to the yes, but you have to come back to that point. Most people aren't going to buy what you sell. You fill your funnel, the funnel goes like that. All a funnel is taking 100 pieces of data and turning that into a few pieces of people that buy your service or product. But understand there's a whole bunch of them that have got no thanks.
Yeah.
So don't get bothered if it's any other way.
Yeah. I think we're wired for some reason to avoid rejection as a human, and maybe that plays into, especially when you're learning to be an entrepreneur for the first time. And that's what happened to me. I was learning to be an entrepreneur in my first business, and I realized that you could be as talented as you want, but if you can't sell and you can't create a positive cash flow from this talent, then it's going to run out, and you can be very, very talented, but no one will even know about it.
You have a restaurant, someone comes in, okay, and so you know some people that will never complain. And let's say that person complains. First things first, I've now learned that my kitchen may have been making some mistakes, so I can improve that. Yeah. Number 2, I've got an opportunity to engage with that client. Now I've created a relationship with that person. I've allowed them to see I'm sorry for the mistake and I'm working hard to improve it. I've compensated them in some way so that when they leave, maybe they'll give me another chance.
Yeah.
But that person that just says nothing's wrong, they're not coming back.
Yeah.
So that's someone saying no to your service and product. You learn, you get a chance to build a relationship, plus you got a fighting chance of getting them to come back in.
That's awesome. Let's talk about your podcast journey. When was the first time that you came across podcasts? And then when did you decide that it would be something that you want to get into?
Do you know what? As we're sat here in the Capital Club right now, I think one of my first podcasts was actually in here. So Raj Kotecha got me into podcasting. He's a good friend of mine, someone we both know, and talked to me for a long time about doing it. I didn't want to do it. Eventually convinced me, and I started the journey and didn't know what I was doing, didn't have a clue, couldn't make, but he believed it was something good to do.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure for the first few months, I didn't even want to do it in the end. I was just like, why am I spending all this time? What's it leading to? No one's consuming it. No one's listening. No one's watching. I'm spending a load of money. Why am I doing it? Then we had the opportunity to get Tony Robbins to come on the podcast. And that really, for me, was the kind of the flip of the switch, because he agreed to come on while he was in Dubai. And from that moment, whether that was a good or a bad interview, I don't think really mattered, but the leverage I had after hiring Tony was good. So then Grant Cardone and Gary Vee and all these other people were happy to come on the show because Tony had been on the show. So that's when I started to interview people that I was looking up to and aspiring to be like, and learning from and seeing as probably guiding lights and mentors myself. And so I started then to start extracting value from those conversations myself, which were helping me on my journey. Sure. But then probably a year into it, I realized that this was a business development tool. And that then became, hold on a minute, this is a money-making activity. And I'm a big fan of money-making activities. So if I interview someone on my podcast, I have the opportunity 2 weeks later to call them up and say, hey, can I buy you a coffee? I've got a couple of questions for you. Invariably, they say yes. I then can have that coffee with them, tell them about what I do and the value I add and what I might be able to do for their business. And then from there, arrange further meetings with whoever the stakeholders are in their business to consider the services that I offer. So people talk about how do you make money out of podcasts, or how do you cover the cost of a podcast? Make sales. Convert your guests to clients.
Someone who's listening to this podcast for the first time probably might go, well, what about the audience? Does the audience play a part or a role in this whole equation?
Let's say you were going to interview the top 20 people you'd like to do business with. That's 20 prospecting meetings. Who cares who's listening? Who actually cares? What the metrics are, what ranking you have. No one cares, because I've got 20 prospects I've just had a meeting with. And those 20 prospects, if I convert 10 of them or 5 of them, okay, and each one of them is worth X multiplied by 5 or 10 means, number one, it's paid for the prospecting meeting, the podcast. Okay, plus it's engaged me with new people. Plus, I also ask them who they would recommend that I have on the podcast.
Right.
So they give me 3 recommendations of 3 more prospects. So I'm now getting referrals from my podcast guest.
Yeah.
And as I do that, this is quite simply a replacement for going to do a first meeting with a potential prospect of a high ticket sale.
Fascinating. Well, I mean, it's not one that I've not heard before, but I find that, and I wonder whether you've done any of these, I find that interviewing people who have my market but no competitive overlap. So rather than going for a prospective client, I'm going after a prospective partner that could potentially introduce me to a whole bunch of clients, right? Have you done any of that? Do you know the difference between interviewing a prospect versus interviewing a prospective partner?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, you can do exactly the same thing. You can use that partner as the door opener. So they come on the show, you build a relationship with them, they become then your introducer to your prospective clients.
Yeah.
And if you're selling high ticket, and let's say, you do 20 interviews, you get 10 prospects, you do 5 sales. If your $100,000 is your ticket price, then you've made $500,000 from 20 interviews. Let's say your podcast costs you $50,000. It doesn't, but let's say, okay, you're still $450,000 better off.
Yeah.
And you'd have had a lot of fun doing it along the way.
Yes. What are some of the unexpected results that you've gotten from having the podcast?
Long-term friendships. People that became friends because of being a guest on the podcast. And I look at those people now and I cherish that I've got them in my life. And that's been, without a monetary value, a personal value. So that's definitely one. And then meeting people that champion you. Okay, you create this kind of little fan community, bizarrely, of this group of people that will defend you against any abuse online, that will fight your corner, that think what you do is really cool.
Yeah.
And they take a lot of value from it. And so I really enjoy the fact that there's this group of people that take a lot of value and always let me know how they enjoyed or didn't enjoy the podcast episode, and are grateful for the fact that I put it together for them to listen to once a week on their way to work in the car. So
let's talk about the podcast. You started as the Spencer Lodge show, and now it's
called Unscripted. Yeah.
It's changed to Unscripted. What is the content of the show, and how do you go about creating it? What is your process from I'm going to have this person on the show to preparing for the interview and getting the interview done? What is that process like for you?
So we have a team of 7 plus me. So we have a meeting once a week to look at the guests that we want. And so we think about who they will be. We then have guest outreach once we've agreed on who they should be. From guest outreach, then one of the team then does their research on the guest to find out some valuable information about them that we can use within the podcast. We prepare a document that has questions or topics that we'd like to discuss. if we're looking for somebody who's got an interesting story. I'm acutely aware with the stage my podcast is at right now that I need to be producing content for my audience that they can enjoy and they can make sure they get some value from as well. So I think a lot about my audience and what would be valuable for them.
Hey, it's Mick Hawes, host of The Toolshed. I love making my podcast, and that's primarily because Ronsley has helped me avoid a whole bunch of really basic mistakes that would have cost me a whole bunch of time, money, and energy. And Rons has compiled a list of these mistakes and how to avoid them, which is really a steal. You can get your copy where I downloaded mine at mistakes.wearepodcast.com. That is mistakes.wearepodcast.com. We Are Podcast. You can't find your voice if you don't use it.
It's obviously changed because you started off with kind of focusing on the guest and now you're kind of focusing on the audience. What's the mindset like? How is that? What's the flip like?
I don't think it's a flip. I think it's a balance. I think you focus on the guest at first because what you want out of it from a business development point of view. Then you focus on what you enjoy. Okay. And then you focus on how do you make it bigger. And the only way you make your podcast bigger is by getting more people engaged with it. Okay. And that means you grow your audience, whichever way you do that. And, you know, my audience is not the biggest by any stretch of the imagination, but we've been going for a long time and we know how to monetize it, which is important. We know how to approach the right type of guest and get them to agree to come on the show. And also because we've been going as long as we've been going, we're able then to use that as leverage to get maybe less reachable guests to come and be on the show.
What part of the interviews do you enjoy the most and how do you have fun while you're in this interview process?
I'm interested in human beings. I'm interested in how people think, why they think the way they think. I'm interested in their views. I'm interested in learning about people. And so because I'm naturally very curious, I have this desire to want to learn about them as human beings. I want to know how they got to where they got, really how they got there, you know. I want to know, was there a silver spoon anywhere? There's something that helped them along the way. I like a scrapper, I like a fighter, so I want to know those guys as well. I want to spend time with them. And I'm just naturally very curious. And so the team give me like 5 or 10 bullet points, And I go as deep as I want to into each of those based upon my own level of curiosity on the subject. Now, with some guests, it's very difficult. They're very stern and very either media savvy or know nothing about media. So it's either one or the other. The media savvy ones can distance themselves a bit but give you good content. The ones that don't understand media sometimes are in an uncomfortable space in a podcast and so don't really let themselves go. And you get that once in a while. But overall, we're able to open people up and just really learn about people. And I care about what people think about, you know?
Yeah. When you look back at the people you've interviewed, what are the interviews that stand out that are not popular names?
Nick Chiaris was one big one for me. He was on death row for 20 years for a crime he didn't commit. His story was beautiful and powerful and heart-wrenching. And I interviewed him online in COVID, but I was live on Facebook. I didn't speak for 45 minutes as he told this most beautiful story. I then interviewed him again, and then he was in London while I was in London, and I got to meet him face to face. And we spent that time. So Nick Chiaris was definitely a big one for me. And it really changed a lot about how I thought. Alex Lewis, he was just a guy who worked in a pub, got sick, good looking guy, arms and legs were amputated in 24 hours because he got septicemia, his mouth and his nose was amputated as well. And his mindset about, he said to me, you can keep my arms and my legs because I wasn't living when I had them.
Oof.
I came alive after I lost them.
Oof.
And he kayaked around Greenland in a kayak with an oar strapped to his shoulders.
That's crazy.
To raise money for charity. And so for me, it's like, wow, what a guy, what a story. Anna Kalukas was very powerful. She was a lady that was sold into a paedophile ring by her mum when she was 6 years old in Belgium and raped every weekend by Belgian politicians until she was 11. A harrowing story, but again, what she does now to help others was fascinating to me. So anyone that's got a story that's like that, these types of people. But then also, I've had guests on the show. I mean, I've had so much fun. Grant's been on the show a couple of times when he's been in Dubai. We've had a lot of fun, and he's such a kind and generous man. And he always makes the content such a joy.
Yeah.
You know, he's such a joy to be around. And I've got some really funny stories about my time with him. A lot of people don't like Grant Cardone, but I say you don't know who he is. When you know who he is, you will like him. He's got lots of likability. And again, what are we, nearly 300 episodes in, so it's hard sometimes to remember everybody. But there's plenty out there that were really good. I had an ex-mafia boss. He was brilliant, became a born-again Christian. Michael Francisi. I had a guy that was a diamond thief. And he stole $60 million worth of diamonds from a jewelry store once. And I'm like, why diamonds? He said, have you ever tried to carry $60 million in cash? Oh, yeah, of course. I said, oh, yeah. And he literally had a briefcase full of diamonds. And he said, and I was always polite. If there's people in the shop, I was always polite. I always made friends with them. I was just nuts. He was really good. Leon Logothetis was game changer for me. He had a TV show called The Kindness Diaries. It's the most beautiful Netflix series he had. And at the end of the interview, I said to him, I'm a bit jealous of you because you got a TV show and I don't. And he just looked at me and he said, well, why haven't you?
Oh.
And just called me out and then offered to help me every week for the next 6 weeks, gave me an hour of his time. And we then came up with an idea for a TV show, and we've just finished making that show now.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, people become game changers.
And you can tell, I mean, even from the way you're recollecting your guests, you can tell how much you're enjoying it, because it's so, it feels like a part of your heart is in this podcast, you know, part of who you are. Let's get into the podcast and the conversations you're having, because I think it ties really well into perspective, especially for me, for someone like me. And that's the reason I got into podcasting, is after the first business, having $478,000 of debt, I spent my last, I think I had $210 in the account. I spent 192 of those dollars on a mic set to do the podcast. And I genuinely believe that the podcast got me out of debt. Not directly, but because I was doing 3 episodes a week, I was at least having 3 conversations a week. And I was almost borrowing people's energy in that time. Even though my energy was down, I was vibrating at this lower frequency. Because of other people, they kind of lifted me up consciously, unconsciously, irrespective. But I was exposed to this different way of thinking, this different energy, this different vibration, week in, week out. Even though after the recording stopped, I was still in that state of having to pay back that kind of money. Do you find that it happens when you do your podcast? Because perspective is such an important part of how you see the world.
Every guest has something valuable to share. You have to find your way to get them to give you that. And there's 2 beneficiaries. Your audience is one and you are the other. And I think that's your duty within the podcast, for yourself and for your audience. And if you can do that, then it helps you on any journey. And that could be a journey from, I'm okay right now, but I want to be a superstar.
Yeah.
You know, that could be that journey. You know, it could be, I'm doing really well right now, but how do I take it to the next level? As much as it is, you know what, I think I'm annoying people, I think I should calm it down a little bit. So there's all of these different places that different people are at. It's not all about being on the bones of our arse in the darkest place and rising from the ashes. It's not the Phoenix story all the time. Some people are just fine. It's just like, how do I turn that? How do I get that special stuff? Where's that special sauce come from? Well, it comes from the brain of the person you're talking to.
Yeah.
Extract it.
Yeah. How important is it for us to be ourselves, especially when we're putting content out there and we're putting ourselves out there and we're creating a podcast? And the tendency, just because of the way you answered the last question, I wonder whether there's this element of when people start a podcast, they try to be something else that they're not. Is there a way to amplify more of ourselves, or do we look at ourselves and feel like, no, we want to be more like that person because we look up to them? Is there something that we can do ourselves?
I don't like using this word, but showmanship. There has to be an element of us that brings our best to that conversation. So we have to be really interested to be deemed interesting. So that's the first thing. Secondly, we have to bring our enthusiasm, our passion, our best version of ourselves. We can't bring our dark, quiet, solemn character to that type of place because our audience needs to see the best version of us.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're not authentic.
Yeah.
Okay. The introvert doesn't have to stop being the introvert. He still can be authentic, but you've got to understand what you're producing. The content you're producing has got to educate for the ones that want to be educated. It's got to entertain the ones that want to be entertained. And if you can educate and you can entertain at the same time, then you have a recipe for getting inside people's heads.
Yeah.
And if you can get inside people's heads, then maybe your product or your service, okay, is then going to be more appealing to those people.
I want to ask you, what happens now that the recording is done? How do you process that? And also maybe tie that into the monetization and the results from a business perspective.
Okay, so once it's filmed, it's then taken off for editing by the team. So they edit it, they then create the intro and the micros. Sometimes there's 2, sometimes there's 4, depending on what we need for the episode. That's all done by the team, so they do all of that. And if you don't have a team, guess what? Go to Fiverr.com or go to one of these companies. They'll do it all for you for £2.50 in a packet of packaging. So it's not difficult. I know it's out there.
Yeah.
That's the first thing.
Yeah.
Don't think it can't be done. Don't think it's difficult. Don't think that, okay? So once that's done, then what happens is then the episode is scheduled, and we obviously are filming 8 weeks, 10 weeks in advance. So the episode is scheduled, goes in, and then I check the micros to make sure I'm happy with them. I check the rest. I don't listen to the whole episode until it's finally done and it's coming out. I want to be remembering the conversation when the guest is consuming it. And then from there, then we then contact that person if we're doing business or aim to do business 2 weeks later. So then we contact, just thank them again and tell them that we're really excited about the episode. Everyone really enjoyed it. The team thought it was great to edit it. Show them some micros and say, look, I want to buy you a coffee. I've got a couple of questions for you. And then invariably they have a coffee, and that's your monetization opportunity. Then on top of that, you have the opportunity to gain sponsors.
Yep.
Okay. And that could be the guest's company, could be a sponsor. You don't know. So there's that opportunity. There's other opportunities for sponsorship. And remember, you see a lot of companies paying influencers to do 1-minute reels and all this kind of stuff. I can't tell you how important it is to remember that when people post content, most people don't consume all of that content. Okay? So if you post a video on YouTube, most people don't watch the whole video. But people do listen to an episode of the podcast, invariably to the end. And that might be a car journey. It might be while they're mowing the lawn, whatever it might be they could be doing, but they're going for a run. People don't move that around content when they're doing something else. They just stick with what they're listening to.
Yeah.
So a podcast, I believe, is way more valuable for any brand than just posting content out there. Then think about that brand that's aligned with what you do. And so they're a sponsor. Let's think about how it could be beneficial. So they're the other monetization opportunities I have. And then there are people that want to come on the podcast to promote their business or service. And if they do, then there's a fee. Sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say no. There's the price if you want to come on. Oh no, we want it for free. Okay, well I'm like, you go. It cost me money to do this.
Yes.
So if I bring you on the show and they trust me, they're going to trust you. But you're not getting that for free, pal.
Of course. So let's talk about the podcast. Now you're a seasoned podcaster. You're considered one of the most influential people here in Dubai, which is crazy. Congratulations, by the way. That's
I have no idea what that means. No idea.
And here's another thing. A lot of people, when I'm new to Dubai, obviously, and your name is mentioned more often than anyone else's name that I've heard. Even now at the Capital Club, more people recognize you than they recognize me, even though I've been here for the last couple of months, you know? So you've been around for a while.
It's weird when you say that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, well, how does that feel?
Weird.
Why?
Just feels weird. The bit that I'm really uncomfortable with is people staring at me in a restaurant, thinking they know me, or not sure if they know me, or who do they recognize as someone like me. Look, if you put yourself out there, then you're going to be recognized by some people, aren't you? People that are in your space.
Yeah.
The reality is, coming back to rejection, is there's 10 million people in this country. Bet your bottom dollar no more than 1% know who I am. So there's 99% that don't.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
give yourself some perspective around that if it happens to you.
So before I land this plane, maybe advice, ways to think, perspective on a podcast for a business. What are some of the ways that my audience would really see their podcast, where they have a podcast now, they're kind of thinking of starting a podcast for their business?
I think every single company should have a podcast, period. Every company should have a podcast episode that goes out every single week to their employees. So the employees know what's going on in the company. Different people are being interviewed in different positions, not just the big boys upstairs, but everybody playing a different role in the company, and sharing valuable information and engaging with the employees and showing them what the company's doing, how they're doing it, and bringing forward opportunities for discussion and debate around those things. So I think it's brilliant from that point of view. I also think it's brilliant for that company to be able to share that with their customers. Okay, so every one of their customers or clients gets to be exposed to that podcast episode as well, so that the customer can see what's going on internally in the business. Okay, and then that's an opportunity for then the customer to engage more, to ask questions, to learn more, to feel more connected, to feel more involved. But also that then produces media that can be used to acquire new clients. So make a podcast. And the thing is, people think it takes a lot of time. And the truth is, if you get a well-oiled machine together, you can do this one Sunday a month.
Correct. 4
episodes, one Sunday a month, whatever it is, one day a month. Do that. And then what you'll find is you're able to produce that content very easily. And again, get better and better at doing it. Now, individuals that have got small businesses selling B2B or B2C, that are trying to build their own personal brand, again, everyone should be doing it. Now, are some people bad at it? Yeah, but how do you get good at it? Practice. Okay, yeah, but I'll never be good at it. I'm not, I don't like this, I don't like that. Stop the stories, stop the excuses. You don't get anywhere with excuses. It's like you don't get a chance to be miserable if you focus on gratitude.
Yes.
Okay, you don't get a chance to be successful if you focus on excuses.
Yes.
Okay, so let's get focused on not having excuses and 5 reasons why. Every company starts a podcast. Now, when you look at it, we then have to ask people why they give up, because a big percentage of people, 20 episodes in, have given up.
Right.
A podcast is not a short-term thing. It's a long-term thing. This is something you do for years. So understand, you're not going to get rich quick. You know, I didn't make anything at all out of my podcast for probably 2.5 years. Not a penny.
Right.
I didn't know what I was doing. The benefit now is that there's plenty of people that have been on the journey now for 3 or 4 years.
Yes.
So you can lean into their learnings.
Yes.
When I started, there weren't that many people out there doing it. I'm 6 years in.
Yes.
So there weren't that many people out there doing it. So who could I go to for reference? You know, Joe Rogan wasn't going to talk to me. And then and then people who didn't know all had opinions.
Yes.
So you have to be careful whose opinion you listen to.
Spencer, this has been a slice of heaven.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening. Listen to the back catalog of over 300 episodes by going to wearepodcast.com. If you're looking for something specific, let the We Are Podcast team point you in the right direction. Send us an email on podcast@wearepodcast.com. Also, if you know a business owner who has a podcast, ask them to listen. Share an episode with them. The conversations here are going to save them lots of trial, error, time, and money. Until next week, much love.